Hello and welcome to Almost 30. You don't need to be 30 or almost anywhere near it to listen. So just an FYI, disclaimer. Disclaimer before we start. I'm Krista Williams.
I'm Lindsay Simsick. So glad you're here. I thank you for being here every single week. If you're an OG member, if you are new to the pod, we started this thing from our closet floors. We were going through a time in our late 20s when we felt really lost and had a lot of questions and fears and found one another and found comfort in our conversation. So we brought it to the podcast world, and here we are 6 years later.
It's funny to think that we thought people needed to hear what we were talking about.
Because if you go back to our first episodes, I don't know if people needed to hear that.
We reacted to our first episode. We're going to react to
we're going to do
another one.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the audio is so bad, I don't know if we'll be able to do it.
We'll be able to do it.
I can't get over how we thought it was okay to have so we had this one interview that we did years ago, probably 5 years ago at this point. Who knows? I change my numbers all the time, but we're in a room. It was a conference room at a place we weren't supposed to be. It was at one place.
It was a conference room, and there was like drywall all over the floor.
And it was 4 people talking with one recorder in the middle of the room.
Yeah, just one of those recorders that like you see in like 1990s Law and Orders where they're like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Interviewing someone.
So you have 4 audios of people in a room with tons of echo with no sound support. Like, dude.
But
we were
did
talking
it.
about dating apps. I remember that when we were talking about like dating apps, like how to make the best dating app profile.
Were we talking to Justin
and Zach?
And Zach.
We were talking to my now husband and then his friend Zach, and we were talking about like you were on dating profiles then too. You were on dating apps. We were talking about like dating app etiquette. I literally could give a fuck about that. Oh my God.
Yo, no you literally could give a fuck
shade.
About a lot of things that we did at the beginning.
But
if I think about that, I'm like, damn, we talked about the most random. But at the time, did you feel like you didn't give a fuck?
So the dating app thing, it's like I'm laughing about that, but it's an interesting thing.
Totally.
It's just studying human psychology.
Yes.
You know, where you're like, what makes someone swipe? What makes them, and like if you're doing it, I'm interested in doing it. So I'm like, okay, what's going on? And it's fun to talk about because it's one of those things too, like, and I think in dating and love and relationships, there's this like pretentious air that people can sometimes have about it. And I'm saying that I probably have that myself where you're like, I would never date someone that blah, blah, blah. Maybe women just get like this.
Yes.
But you kind of have
fun. It's a protective mechanism.
Yeah, building this like perception of like, oh, I would only swipe on a guy that's this. And just having that conversation about these things that like don't happen.
Totally. Dude, it's so weird that it's only gotten more popular.
I know.
If we think about it.
I know. And what freaks me out a little bit about dating apps is the amount of sheer detail that is actually in them.
Yes.
And now apps are just the amount of detail about you, which could be helpful. I'm not sure. So there's companies that actually base their dating app program on the sheer amount of detail that they use to match people. But I don't know. There's something about that for me where I'm like, oh, I don't want that much information about me.
Yes.
And then I also have 500 episodes of a podcast where I'm talking for hours a week.
Yeah, literally.
Oh my God, help me.
That's what my guys used to do. They went to listen to the podcast early on. But I think that it also kind of takes away, or people will swipe left on people that they might like.
Yes.
But they see that he likes to camp on the 3rd Sunday of every month. They're like, I'm out.
I think it's funny. Guys always have like the picture of them with like their niece or nephew as the main one.
Softens it up.
They're like, I'm good with children.
Yeah, I'm going to be a great
And then they're like,
father.
a vacation with the boys. One time wearing a suit at a wedding.
Like with a drink in their hands. Well, one with a drink in their hand.
Yeah. One time wearing a suit at a wedding because they look good. One with a niece or nephew. One on a vacation, like hiking on the top of a mountain.
You know what a good one is? Giving the best man speech, or like a speech somewhere.
They're like, I'm a leader and I'm well spoken. Yes. Yeah. I'm a well spoken leader. Watch me. It's sometime with them with a microphone.
Yes.
That's so true. I guess what's better? What's the girls' version of that, though?
Oh, wow.
I think girls, it's always on a hike. There's a hike, or there's an outdoorsy moment, I think, usually.
Yeah.
There's a dressed up moment, too. So it's kind of like the inverse. I don't think girls post pictures of them with babies, though.
No, that's too much.
Yes, because they're afraid that it'd be like too much. But for guys, it's cute.
Yes. Standard.
Double standard.
I'm trying to think of the girl equivalent. It's definitely like you want to show a little bit of the. It's funny with girls, like the professional side, because it's like, what do you want to see me in? Like, I don't know, at my desk.
Yes.
I don't know what you.
Yeah, you're like, hi.
But I'm pretty sure I put, which is actually weird because it makes it. I definitely put pictures, like a picture from tour or something.
Yeah, for sure. I would,
because I'm famous.
Yeah, you're like, wow. Do you want to be a supporter in the crowd? I remember when Justin and I first started dating. It was like our first. So we had been talking long distance, and then we went to Coachella together. Mm-hmm. He bought his plane ticket for Coachella 4 days before we went. So I was unwell. I was going to lose my mind.
Wait, because you wanted him to buy it?
Because we didn't really know each other, and we were just talking on the phone. And he's like, no, I'm going to do it. And then 4 days before he bought it, I was like, hey, this is not how I roll. What
did you do?
I called him. I was like, hey, this is like not how I do things.
Yeah. To last minute.
My favorite thing at that time was to be like, I don't know if this is a strategy or not, but I would be like, all my guy friends think it's so weird that you're doing this. And be like,
wow.
And like use them as like a way to communicate what I was thinking. Guys, this was 10 years ago. But I would do that. I was like, this isn't how I do things. Like you're coming or you're not. I don't know what's going on. He's like, oh, this is like kind of how I always buy things last minute. He's no longer like that, thank God. But
that's hilarious.
So when we were at Coachella, he had his phone out, blah, blah. He's talking to someone else, and I saw a dating app on there, and I was...
I can see
another one. I was unwell. I was like, are you fucking joking me? In front of everybody? And I left the room, and I said something else, and everyone was like, is she kidding? I wasn't kidding at all.
And he was like...
Yeah, honestly. He's like, my balls chopped again. And then made that bitch delete it, but... Yeah, he was like, I didn't know. We're like, I
mean, it's totally normal for him to still have a dating app.
Completely normal. Very normal.
You guys aren't official yet.
I have problems. This is why we have our amazing guest on this episode for actual advice and information. I'm excited because we had Stefan Labasser on the podcast years ago, probably 4 years ago, when we were at the old studio, aka Lindsay's Kitchen, our old apartment. And this is an episode that did really well. And it's interesting because I was saying in the beginning of the episode how faith and like the conversation about God has like come more close to us. Mm-hmm. And at first it was like one of those things where I was like, oh, you're like a faith God person. Mm-hmm. And that was like my perception. Yeah. You think that someone's automatically religious because you tied the two together. So to come back around and be like, oh, it's not about that. It's about like that direction you're moving and that faith towards life. So we talked a little bit about that too, just a tiny bit, but this conversation was so good. There's something that we talked about later in the conversation about the masculine and the feminine and the feminine's withholding of love that I think about, oh my gosh, all the time now. And I see in so many relationships that I have like something that comes up. So basically the concept is around something that I see a lot of women in our community struggle with, and I struggle with myself, and I think was even a conversation that we had with our friends this weekend about women doing so many things. Mm-hmm. So have our jobs. Sometimes we have side hustles. We have our friends. We have our partners. We have our family. We have like whatever we're doing as like self-care. You know, there's so many things that we're doing. And because we're giving in so many different places, sometimes it gets scary in relationship, and women, like, it's not in their nature to withhold love, but now women are in this state of like withholding love from men in their relationships because they're more in the masculine. And he gave this example of a man that saw his partner with her son, and he saw like he was with this woman and the woman had a son and she was just being so loving. And it's almost like when you're with animals, you're just this like free-flowing love that doesn't ask for anything in return and just gives so much love. And he's like, why aren't you giving me the love and like this, like, you know, love without expectation that you give your son or that you give your animal? And I did think about that because that is the natural state of the feminine. Like the feminine is what fills the container created by the masculine. It's like this beautiful expression and river of love. And I do feel like because we're so stretched that there are places in which we withhold love from like our partners. You know, if our partner comes up to us during the middle of the day, they're like, hey, Justin does this all the time. Oh my God. Comes up to me all day during the day. And I'm just like, nope. I like resist the opportunity to give love, to like be in a state of like just presence with love and with joy and with ease. And I think because women are doing so many things, we just feel like this is like the reaction that we need to do. And I don't have like a step for people, but it's really just like noticing where we find ourselves withholding love.
Yeah. And I can imagine like with children, with animals, where the love is so unconditional on their end, it must be easier to give the love because the love that they receive is just this unconditional kind of like, it's like a loop. And then with a partner.
I don't know with kids though. Kids are fuckers, dude. I think kids are, when they're little, are in a state of pure love, but there's not, like kids are not, I don't think kids give back love really, like but in that way.
I think that, but we also see kids as kids, right? We're not like, you know better.
I think we don't expect them to give love back to us. Their existence makes us feel
love. Yes. And then with a partner, it's like there can be layers of like sneaky resentment that you're like, I'm only going to open up and give love if I feel safe enough to do so and like know that I'm going to also get it back. But then we like placing that expectation, that condition on it makes it something that it's not.
Yeah.
So I can definitely...
I think the resentment's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's like also that nervous system thing of like, I'm doing so much, this pleasure and this joy and this... I guess it's the relationship too is sometimes the closest thing we can get to like the opportunity for love. You know, with family and friends, you can, but it's kind of like that intimate, joyful, pleasureful love that you can have. So it's like our resistance of pleasure is sometimes the first to go. That's why we talked about with other experts we've had on the podcast is like women are... you know, not having as much pleasure in the bedroom and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like that was fascinating. We explained it a lot better. And then we talked about like toxic feminism. We talked about this concept of toxic feminism because Stefan would love for his partner to not have to work. He would love for her to be someone that could stay home and support the family and sort of like have that be something she wants to do and they can do in partnership together. So we explored what that would look like and really his reasoning behind that and where toxic feminism can come in sometimes and just shame women for any choice that they make. So I felt like that was fascinating. That was something I've wanted to explore more so because I felt like now that I've seen how burnt out and overwhelmed and overworked so many women in my life are and so many women of our community and of the world, I'm like, man, is this, if we're not making any more money from a household median income standpoint, like we're not taking home more money. Like we're not noticing that much of an improvement in the way that we live. Why is everyone having to work all the time? Yeah. You know?
Does she want to stay home?
He doesn't have a partner. He just has his future partner.
I see.
Yeah, his future partner. That's he's like, it's fine if she wants to do and work whatever she wants to do, but I would ideally love to make a space where I'm making enough where she has the freedom to choose. Sure. And she doesn't need to work if she doesn't want to, but she can if she wants to.
Yeah, there is so much judgment.
Yes.
So much. I was visiting with some family and there's always that like, there was conversations around getting help with your kids, nannies, or staying home or working. And there's judgment on both sides, actually. So it's like, so if you go and work and leave your kids, but you have help, there's judgment. But then if you stay home, there's judgment. You know, it's like...
And it's all on women.
Yes.
This is that internalized misogyny that you talk about where it's like the man, it's like all good. He's never home. He's got to do what he's got to do. You know, it's just, it's always on the woman. Always. It's like, just blows my mind.
It's crazy.
It's sad.
It's really, really sad. And I wonder, you know, it must be lonely for women who actually own it and are just like, this is what I want to do.
Yes.
I do want to stay home.
Yes.
And actually, I want to stay home and maybe get some help a few days a week and do whatever the fuck I want to do. Yes. But for the woman that owns that, I can imagine that there are like a limited amount of friends or support that are like, fuck yeah. You know, you have to kind of be, and then And then you're only choosing to be around people that support that. And, it's like kind of an
I feel like there's a
interesting
jealousy
thing.
too with the internalized misogyny, where it's like women are jealous of women that are well resourced enough to do that. Because women in our life that we know, we have friends that are very well resourced and have support and help, whether it's live-in, whether it's a few times a week, whatever. And they're able to live and express how they feel their independent expression is while still being a mom when they want. And yeah, I mean, it's powerful. It's powerful to see it, but I know not everyone is able to do that or has access to that. But I think the thing is finding where we do find ourselves judging or shaming other women. Because I think when we were talking about this yesterday in another conversation about that internalized misogyny, that is so fucking deep. We don't even know what's going on.
So deep.
Where it's like, how are we shaming and judging women all the time for the decisions that they're making? It's like crazy.
Yeah, and I even feel like, I don't know if it starts with the family, but I'm just like thinking about that, where like whether it's sisters, mothers, like there is something there with that connection where, you can love them unconditionally, but there is something there with like the just built-in power dynamics of like eldest child, middle child, mother, her mother. There's just something there that I think possibly plants the seed for how you might be navigating some of these.
Yes. I think we should have Bethany Webster on again, the mother wound, because there was something, she's been posting stuff about like the rebellious teenager, and I'm just like, dude,
you're like me.
I literally am like, tell me how this goes back to my mother wound, me being a fucking little rebel. Anyways, so this conversation is really powerful. I'm really excited. I loved it. This one was solo with me.
I love
Stefan came to Los Angeles, and we got the I got the opportunity to sit down with him. There's also another episode of ours you can watch on YouTube or on iTunes. You can search Stefan's name and Almost 30 to get more. But I'm really grateful you're here. If you're new to us because of Stefan, welcome to the show. We're grateful that you tuned in. This is usually how we do things. We do like 15-minute catch up, and then we get into our interview, which we will start very soon.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. If this episode just hit you and you would love to share it with a friend, we just encourage you to. That helps us to grow, and we will see you on the other side. Enjoy this one.
Me and Lindsay sometimes will like laugh about in high school and in middle school and grade school the food that they would serve us at. Like we used to eat like, we'd come in and eat like a giant cookie as like breakfast and a snack.
Well, 10-minute break. We got our soft sugar cookies. And I'd wonder why I'm like passed out in third period and unable to do a quadratic equation.
I'd have 3 chocolate milks at lunch in Ohio. Yo.
What about, you didn't?
I mean, not 3 chocolate milks. That was the one right there. Yeah, no, for lunch, just about every day, I would get a personal little circle pizza.
Of course.
And I get a pretzel with cheese. Yes. And I would use the cheese to dip the pizza in.
Yo!
Yeah, I was making myself out of that every day. So, and also I remember them coming to the school for promotions. Like we had the school that I went to in Missouri is like one of the top schools in the state. And so like a lot of promotions would come there. So like energy drinks, Surge soda came to our school.
I remember Surge.
And so like we got all these free samples, and then we didn't really have a lot of money. So I took more of the free samples and, take them home. And, it's so interesting where nobody's asking what is the impact this is having on our students versus here's this check. It's just soda, and just integrating this into the culture and into the fabric of the school. And it's not that our teachers or facilitators were bad people. It's just part of the culture. We didn't know any better. But when we do, the question is, what do we do about it? And that's when you get into a little bit more tension because things are so solid in the way the systems are built. But this is why I'm so excited about this time because everything is so fluxed up. And it's more malleable. It might seem absolutely nuts and a big struggle right now, but I feel that the decisions that we make right now, we can literally create a new form of healthcare system, so it's pretty exciting.
Healthcare, education. I feel like there's so many aspects of our everyday lives as adults and as kids that is in total flux. And what do you Yeah, I'm curious, just as someone who is an expert in the health space, like what opportunities are you seeing specifically, especially as a dad too?
So specifically for the health space, I'll talk about that, which is really exciting, because our traditional model of healthcare, I don't think a lot of folks realize what this current state is. And so I've been really advocating and sharing some of these statistics every opportunity that I get, because the state of affairs is not really good. We've got right now we're knocking on the door of almost 250 million US citizens are overweight or obese. All right. We've got about 130 million citizens are diabetic or pre-diabetic. We've got 60% of our citizens have some degree of heart disease already. And really, this really well done meta-analysis just came out. And it basically concluded that about only 12% of United States citizens are metabolically healthy. All right. And this isn't to mention 115 million adults are regularly sleep deprived. This isn't to mention about upwards of 50 million folks with an autoimmune condition now. I can keep going on and on and on and on. The question is, how do we get to this state? Because most of these issues have skyrocketed in the last 4 decades. And one of those areas of emphasis for me is children. Just since 1980, the rate of obesity in children has tripled. And it's just like, why are we not doing something about this? It's not okay. Because we have this phenomenon of recidivism where getting locked in that state where you're dealing with your weight when you're young, it becomes exponentially more difficult when you get older. And so what does this do? This radically increases your risk of all manner of diseases that I just mentioned are killing all of us. I don't know if you guys remember, but of course you remember, some of these conditions were kind of relegated to old age, like heart attacks, stroke, cancer, diabetes. That happens when you're old. It's successively getting younger and younger and younger when these things are occurring, to the degree we have so many of these incidents taking place in children. We even had to change the name of, it used to be called adult onset diabetes. Now it's type 2 diabetes, because it's not just in adults anymore. And so this is just a snapshot of the state of affairs. And again, it's not good. And the question is, what's going on behind the scenes to make it like this? And what can we actually do to change it? And so one of the big things that I'm seeing shifting right now is in the education system, but not conventional education, which is another big issue we can kind of come back to. But it's more folks that are really, because of our access at our fingertips to more knowledge than, the presidents of a few decades ago having access to. And more folks are being adamant about getting self-educated, learning about their own bodies, they want to feel good, they want to feel better, they want to be more successful, they want to look good, all the things. But then, just a caveat, that can get it to an unhealthy place as well, potentially. But there's a lot more folks. This is why podcasts are so epic. The platform is massive now. And, it's really exciting, but in healthcare specifically, the need and the desire for more people who are doing integrative medicine, functional medicine, health coaching, going to different institutes and getting certifications, the fitness side of things as well has just exploded. There are a lot more folks who are seeking education outside of this cookie cutter framework. And I just shared this with you guys. Actually, today I did a guest lecture for the students at NYU. Shout out to if any NYU students are listening, for the neuroscience department. And these tenets that I've been teaching I've been in this field for 20 years, are now integrating themselves into higher education. I'm working with folks at Stanford, I'm working with folks at Harvard to help to kind of jettison the old paradigm and create a hyperlink to a new way of education, because a lot of folks don't know this. It takes on average, once we have a solid randomized placebo-controlled trial demonstrating the efficacy of fill in the blank, it can take well over a decade for it to actually get integrated into practice, get integrated into education. On average, it's about 17 years historically. And the craziest thing is that's still happening though we have the internet. So like you can literally check and see like that thing's obsolete. But if it's in the education system, if somebody graduated with that same way of thinking, it's very difficult because of our indoctrination to be able to put that bias to the side and to accept a new way of thinking. So that's the exciting part, is that more people are jumping in, learning about their own bodies, wanting to educate themselves, get their families healthy. And then it becomes a contagious thing as well, you know. Even though sickness has been contagious, health is really contagious as well. So people are like, I want to share this with more people. I want to, you know, help my sister. I want to help my, you know, my neighbors. And it just kind of grows from there. That's definitely what happened with me and why I'm here today.
On the overweight or obese piece, I want to like pull apart after this what exactly is going on and why we're sort of seeing these happen. With the overweight or obese piece, is it based on like the BMI, or what sort of, how is that measured? Because, you know, that's been something that I've wondered too, is the BMI the most accurate method of measuring our health in that way? So how is that measured?
Yeah, it's done off of BMI,
Okay.
but that is not the best metric for health, because it could, you know, if it's a NFL running back, he might be 5'10" and 220 pounds, and, you know, you'd be classified as overweight. But we know for the majority of people that BMI is going to be an accurate average or accurate assumption of where we are with our health. Better metrics would be, you know, body fat measurements, things of that nature. But, you know, obviously that's more complicated to be able to extract that information. So that's such a great question, because, but this is getting into the minutia of like where we should be. I want to talk about the small things, but we don't even have the big stuff covered.
I know,
you know?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And that's even so. And there's so many different like levers we could pull on this of what it is, whether it's education, whether it's our healthcare system, whether it's our government or our media. But what do you see as like some huge factors for how we're missing the mark, or like how we've got to this place and how we continue down this path of greater levels of obesity, greater levels of diabetes, heart disease, all of these things? And then lastly, are we talking about the West? Like, is this United States focused?
Yeah, this is definitely an international phenomenon that's taking place for sure. But the United States is the leader. We have the highest rate of
We're
obesity.
the leader in everything.
Yeah.
We like to be the best.
We're the best.
We're the best, baby.
You know, wave the flag. We're the LeBron James
Yes.
of fatness.
We're like, we're gonna be fat. We're gonna all be
Yes.
fat. Yes.
We're the best at it. You
Yes,
know?
we're the
and,
best.
you know, so I think it's important for us to understand, in my opinion, and I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of people, you know, in a close context, and then millions of folks through books and all these different things that I've had the ability to interact with and to share and to teach. But the folks that I've worked with in a personal context, I've seen one of the consistent pieces missing in this weight loss phenomenon. You know, most people that were coming into my clinic were folks that wanted to lose weight. They wanted to be in shape. They wanted to feel good about themselves. But one of the biggest issues is folks are trying to fight something they don't understand. They're trying to get rid of something that they don't understand. They don't understand how it works. They don't understand how it got there. All they know about is deprive myself to get where I want to go. All right. Now, even the words that I'm saying can start to paint an unhealthy picture, or maybe an inaccurate view of how this actually works. Now, where did this idea come from? My first day of nutritional science class in college is this big auditorium classroom. The very first day, the teacher said, if you can control calories, you can control your weight. Now, he was overweight, significantly overweight himself. He believed what he was saying, and I know that he had experienced what so many of the patients I work with experience, which is a state of learned helplessness and feeling like he's just doing it wrong. He's not doing it hard enough, right? It's this calorie metric. I just need to manage my calories efficiently, and I'll get there. He's just feeling, I know in his mind at that time, I just need to cut calories more.
Yeah.
And so now here's where we are today. And what I really hope to impress into culture is this term I want everybody to take in and remember. It's called epicaloric control. All right, epicaloric control. So what we know today is that there are several factors that actually control what calories do in your body. It's not that calories don't matter, but we've got to be able to step back and take a meta perspective and ask simple questions that can get overlooked when we're just caught in the stuff, which is, where the hell did calories come from? Like, where did this concept come from? And so what I did was I went back and investigated the entire story. And there were even the calorie, the term, it was nothing about food. It was used in physics and engineering. And eventually it parlayed its way into food. And even the way that we look at calories. So what it is it's a measurement of energy, right? That's kind of the box that it's put in. But what type of energy? Because the human body isn't a calculator. It's more like a very dynamic chemistry lab. There's so many different things happening, and your metabolism is so unique to you. Calories literally, and we can share some of this data on this, how two people can be on the exact same diet, twins. And I talked about this in my latest book, Eat Smarter. And there's a great database of identical twins. And this was coming from researchers in St. Louis, which was, my hometown, which is really awesome. But what they were doing was looking at how changes in the microbiome of one twin affects their rate of obesity compared to the other if they're on the same diet, in the same environment, same exercise exposures, all that. And so they found conclusively that when one of the twins, identical twins, has a microbiome cascade that is associated with obesity and insulin resistance, they in fact have higher rates of obesity and insulin resistance versus their twin who has what we can kind of put in this term of, quote, lean bacteria cascade. I'm being very superficial with this, but that's what we see. So we know that even your microbial fingerprint can affect your caloric assimilation and expenditure. So really quickly, people are fighting something they don't understand. So I'll just share really quickly, if I can, what fat is. Can we do that real quick?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So
I was just thinking of the twins for a second, how much money these people get paid. They're probably like, every scientist is like, we need twins. Those twins are just, yes. You're like, yes, more twins.
So we've got different types of fat communities in our bodies. First, I'll come back to this. It's very important. It's like it's going to be one of those things that changes the way you think and feel.
Because when you say fat, like, people feel certain
yes,
ways.
yeah.
It's a charged word where we're like, we need to get rid of fat or not eat so much fat or
burn fat.
Yeah, like with certain trends, you're like, oh, I need my healthy fats and I need
that's true.
Yeah, you just said it perfectly. That's exactly where I was going to go. I was going to touch on that. So let's talk about storage fats first. That's one of the communities. So storage fats are one of the greatest evolutionary adaptations that we've had. It's enabled us as a species to be able to survive when we have a scarce access to food. So it is literally evolved to help us to survive. So number one, being a storage source of energy to just do stuff, to be human. It's also protection against, falls and, trauma and things like that. And this is a whole other, even that being a protection for trauma, this can be a really dense box to open up. And also it's a communicative vessel or layer for data transmission throughout your entire body. All right. Fat is really remarkable. So what types of fats do we have as storage fats? There's three main categories of this. So we've got subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that's kind of just below your skin. And, if you think about the fat on your arms, on your thighs, on your butt, we can have some on our belly, but it's more the stuff that we can pinch. The stuff that's a little bit harder to grab on the belly, that's called visceral fat. And visceral fat is the big problem. It's the big issue today. Because visceral fat specifically dramatically increases your risk of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, the list goes on and on. It just dramatically increases your risk of dying early. So it's dangerous. But again, we evolved to have some of it, and it's kind of like the place that your body would normally store last. All right?
What's the brown fat? Like,
We'll
people
get
talk
there.
about brown
Yep.
fat. Okay,
We'll
perfect.
absolutely get there. Yeah. So So with storage fat. So the last one is intramuscular fat. This is one a lot of folks haven't probably heard about. And intramuscular fat is when I was again, I'm gonna go back to my college class one more time, even though I was miseducated. I was taught that fat and muscle are dichotomous. Like they're two different things, right? They're separate. You want to build the muscle, burn the fat. But intramuscular fat is literally used as on-site energy for your muscles all the time. So even as we're sitting here and moving around, moving our arms, we need to be so thankful for our intramuscular fat to actually fuel the activity of the muscles. Now, even that type of storage fat can be overfilled with energy, and we get this phenomenon called, like, quote, chubby muscles, right? So these are storage fats, and we've evolved these capacities to help us, again, to survive. Our body fat is literally trying to help us to survive. We could not survive without it. It's just doing what it's designed to do. Now, it can be a bit clingy, but it's just doing what it's programmed to do. And today, again, it's because we are hardwired to have times when we don't have that much access to food. Now we have 24/11, I just added some extra days of the week. We have so much access to food perpetually that these mechanisms that are primed for a certain way of existence are they're obsolete in a sense. But your genes don't care. Your body doesn't care. Your cells don't care. These fat cell communities don't care. They're just doing what they're programmed to do. All right, so those are storage fats. Next, as you mentioned, is brown adipose tissue. And I'm going to share another one too. These are a fat cell community that actually, this type of fat versus storing fat, it burns fat. All right, so it's a fat cell community that burns fat for fuel, but it has some of the same functions as the other type of fat in its ability to kind of sustain itself in a sense. And so brown adipose tissue, it has this very strong thermogenic effect, and it helps to keep your body warm. Babies have a lot of brown fat, okay? And so as we get older, our brown fat ratio drops, but we still have some as an adult. It's usually like up around our collarbones or sternum, on our shoulder blades, kind of down our spine, we have some. And so, but now we know today there's so many different modalities that we can utilize to increase our brown fat ratio, the mobility activity of it, basically increase your metabolic rate. Just to do your day-to-day stuff that you're normally doing, you'll just be burning more calories because you have a higher ratio of brown fat. Now, here's the other one. This is a newly discovered beige fat.
Ooh.
All right, beige fat. Now, beige fat is really interesting. It is unique. It's coming from beige fat stem cell precursors, so it's not like the other types of fat, but it has the ability to become both types of fat. It can become white adipose tissue or storage fats, or it can become brown adipose tissue. All right, so also, again, the storage fats, they're sometimes called white adipose tissue. So now the question is, how do we make this beige fat get a tan and become a little bit more brown, the brownish type, versus becoming another white adipose tissue storage site? And again, there's many different modalities, and we can come back and talk about some of these things to nudge it into that brown fat domain. I'll just throw one in here real quick. And this is not to be dogmatic about any of these subjects. This is just what the data shows. So one of the cool studies that I broke this down in Eat Smarter, but essentially researchers used fMRIs, and they actually were looking at activity of our brown fat when people drink coffee. And they saw that these areas of the body starts to light up, and we can see that there's a nudging of beige fat into brown fat when your cells interact with coffee. All
Coffee
right?
specifically or caffeine?
Coffee. Yeah,
Wow.
and you think about even the color of it, right? See, these are getting into a little bit more philosophical things.
That's what I like.
But there are some really solid, even this term, the doctrine of signatures, which has been something utilized for thousands of years, where our ancestors were like, certain foods will tell you what they're good for based on the way they look, how they smell, how they taste, how they operate in nature. And so, I pay attention to stuff like that. Even with colors and all these different foods, if we start to look at it through a different lens, what we're really seeing is antioxidants. And the color will directly indicate which type of antioxidants you're going to find. But anyways, we'll circle back to that. So we've got these brown fat communities, storage fat. We've got communities that burn fat. Last community I'll share is we've got structural fats. Okay. So your brain, for example, is made of primarily these structural fats. Your brain, people hear this all the time, your brain is mostly fat. That's the dry weight of the brain. The brain is mostly water, first and foremost. So your brain is about 80%, upwards of 80% water. And this is an important caveat, upwards of 80% water. The dry weight of the brain is primarily fat, but it's structural fat. So we'll just stick on this one, but we got to talk about this water piece. It's the biggest piece. So of these structural fats of the brain, this is fats in the brain are, I want to give you one good example. All right. So let's say, which sport did you play? What was your favorite sport?
Tennis.
Tennis. Okay. So the first time you picked up a racket, how old do you think you were?
I think I was like 5.
5? Okay. So that 5-year-old picking up that racket and giving it a swing, I don't know how it turned out. It probably wasn't like the greatest stroke you've ever made,
right.
But over time of you doing that same repetition, it got easier and easier and more automatic. You didn't have to think about it. You didn't have to think about hand position, foot position, any of that stuff. It just becomes automatic. Mm-hmm. As we repeat things, your brain starts to lay down more myelin over these nerve firings connecting. So it's kind of like insulation around a nerve pathway. And so as that's happening, that's like Steph Curry, for example. Like that's how he could just shoot a 3-pointer from all these different weird, kooky angles and, just have such accuracy. He's done it so much that it's just really ingrained in his system. He's laid down those pathways with myelin. Myelin is a fatty sheath. All right, so these structural fats are used to make the brain. Now, here's the good news, in a sense. Structural fats, because in those times of famine, as we evolved, when we don't have access to food, our body's using our body fat. If your brain was made of body fat, we'd be screwed because your body would literally use your brain for fuel. So like homemade zombie food, yes. Right? Yeah. But these structural fats are able to maintain their integrity. So it's a different type of fat, but they're enabling a lot of different neurological processes, cognitive processes. So this is just a summation. We can dig in deeper. I want to share one more little point here with the water just really quickly. I just went through, the I just taught this class. It's a neuroscience class. And one of the biggest things, the teacher, she was asking, the usual teacher, the professor in the class, what are some tips for, we've got finals coming up, whatever, or midterms, whatever she said. And I was talking about a little bit of this brain anatomy. And one of the things that folks don't realize, we're looking for this nootropic, like some limitless pill. We got to take this supplement, that supplement, but we don't have these foundational pieces. Again, like I want to talk about the cool stuff we could do, but the journal Neurology just published a study and they found that just short-term dehydration can shrink the volume of your brain. That is not good. Wow. Like your brain literally shrinks. And rehydration rapidly restores the volume of your brain. So your brain is especially subject to dehydration. And just a 2% drop in your body's hydration level can lead to significant cognitive declines. Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise published a study on that. So basic stuff like that. Are you hydrating yourself, your brain, your nervous tissue, your fat also, that interaction with building your muscle also has density with water, and the list goes on and on. These are very foundational principles. So I wanted to start with that, understanding what your fat is doing, the different fat cell communities, and start to appreciate the innate intelligence of our bodies. It's miraculous. Like your body is so amazing and it loves you. Like it has no choice but to love you. Even with autoimmunity, the body is thinks that it's doing something to protect you. And if we're trying to guilt ourselves if we're trying to abuse ourselves, if we're trying to, force ourselves into change, those two energies are so conflicting, and I saw it so many times, people trying to beat their bodies into submission or hate their bodies into submission instead of understanding and appreciating this hyper intelligent, incredible body that you're living in, and understanding it and getting to know it, and then doing things that are supportive and loving and helping to create the conditions to where it goes in the direction that you want.
Okay. So I have a few questions. I feel like metabolism there's this loss as far as understanding about metabolism and fat, and thinking that they don't work together. Maybe that's like kind of my preconceived notion. But I'm going to speak for our audience as a whole. And I'm wondering how, especially our environment, things that we don't necessarily expect to affect our metabolism is hindering it firing at a really healthy rate or way. Can you speak to those factors and how it can be affected?
Yes, this is exactly where we need to go. So now that we know what we're dealing with here, how do we get these systems to actually do the things that we want them to do? So I talked a little bit about the epicaloric controllers, right? So we've got this energy metric in food, calories. It's a very blanket statement. It's very complex. But even how we find calories, how many calories are in a certain food stuff, they put it in a container, which goes into another container filled with water. You incinerate the food, and how much energy it gives off, or how much energy is needed to heat the water up. That's going to determine how many calories are in there. You are not that contraption. Like, your body is so different. It's a bomb calorimeter is what it's called. And, you might be the bomb, but you're not a bomb calorimeter, and it's very different. Because even in that, there's indigestible factors to food too. And that measurement of calories doesn't even take any of that into consideration, or how it's feeding your microbiome. And lastly, the system that, and I'm just going to drop this for everybody, that is on your food label when you're looking at the packages in your grocery store, they're not actually measuring the calories in the food. They don't do that. It's like grass, like generally regarded as safe. There's generally regarded as true as well. And so what they're doing is that water system, which is just basically doing some math. Like, okay, we know that this amount of calories is in this particular food. They're just doing calculations and throwing that food label on there. All right. So just giving you the heads up. And also the calories are going to affect you differently. So here's how we have this association to improve. One of the epicaloric controllers is the type of food itself. All right. The type of food itself. And this really interesting study, what they did was they were trying to find out how a meal of processed foods would affect the metabolism versus a meal of what they deem to be whole foods. All right. And I broke this study all down as well in Eat Smarter, but I'll just give you the cliff notes. So really quickly, so what it was they took one sandwich that they called it a whole food sandwich, right? So it was whole grain bread and cheddar cheese, and gave it to the test participants. Then they had the processed food sandwich, which was white bread and cheese product, right? Which is like Kraft, basically. It's called Kraft Singles because
So nasty.
they can't legally call it cheese.
It literally, it's not in the
that.
fridge, dude. It like sits in the aisleway. Dude, I used to eat Velveeta shells and cheese
all the time.
That was a meal. Like, I would just get the family
100%.
box and just eat that
Same.
bad boy.
Singles.
dude. So
it's
I
not
remember at one
cheese.
time I ate too much. I almost got sick. I was like, yeah, I'm done. We're done.
Shells and cheese. It came out with the liquid
The
instead of the
square,
powder.
yes.
I mean, like the
You're like,
ooze.
this is luxury. It's just like fillers and oils.
So they had test subjects to consume each of these sandwiches. And long story short, just to kind of pinpoint the data, what they discovered was that when folks ate the processed food sandwich, they had a 50% reduction in calorie burn after eating that meal versus when they ate the whole food sandwich. All right? A 50% reduction in their rate of calorie burn. Okay? Now, the question is why? Because what it did was we have a accelerated metabolic response over here, and we have a depressed metabolic response over here. Eating this, and here's the biggest, I almost didn't say this, the sandwiches were the same amount of calories, same amount of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. But the sheer fact that it was heavily processed versus a more whole food version created a depression to the metabolism. And the question is why? Well, what it's doing essentially is creating these. I'm just going to share a term to kind of make sense of it, but it's sort of like a hormonal clog is taking place, where these systems of metabolism are getting blocked and they're not functioning in integrity. And there's multiple facts here. There's some immune response factors. There's factors, of course, with the stress that the body has to go through to try to make sense of something that is so abnormal. You know, the list goes on and on and on at the reasons why. But here's one of the biggest things when we're doing a point system or we're, haphazardly cutting our calories. What is the quality of food that we're bringing in when we bring food in? Because it can be suppressing and depressing your metabolism significantly just based on that food quality. Not to say that a point system won't work or that counting calories won't work. These can be tools, but they are far from being the only tool. And as a matter of fact, the rung of importance is so much lower than these epicaloric controllers. So I'll share two more really quickly. So number one, the type of food itself dramatically determines how your fat cells and their processing is going to associate with the food that you eat and its expenditure. Another one is what we talked a little bit about earlier is your microbiome. You have a unique microbial fingerprint that is nobody on planet Earth has ever, all the billions of people and the people that have come before us have never had a microbiome exactly like yours or a metabolism like yours for that matter. And nobody in the future ever will either. And this is the most important part. Yourself later today is going to have a different microbiome cascade than you have right now. It is constantly changing, constantly in flux. And so now we know that we have, and again, I shared a little bit of this data, but this is probably the hottest, it's kind of gross and weird though. The hottest field of study is the gut right now. And for good reason. Even Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut, but it's just like, forget Hippocrates, whatever, it's so crazy. We knew these things already, but a big reason for this is that what's happening in that terrain is literally determining what food is going to become you. It's such a big deal. It's such a big job. And the amount of stress taking place in this environment or the nature of the environment itself, is it a healthy environment? Is it like a rainforest type environment where there's a dynamic diverse effective climate and all the different things, everything is modulated effectively? Or is it like we've got another aspect of diversity? It could be endangered species or things are going extinct. And so now this is what we see if we look at hunter-gatherer tribes and take a look at their microbiome versus the average American, and you see 4 times more diversity. And just to give a glimpse on what that is, just say you've got 1,000 different bacteria, they got 4,000. You got 2,000, they got 8,000. It's twice as many. I'm sorry, 4 times as many. But we don't really understand when you hear things like that. Why? What's happening? Why are we having so many bacteria go extinct? And it's because of the way that we're eating. Because every bacteria requires something to nibble on. It's just like anything. If we don't have food, we can't stick around. And there's a preferred food substrate or prebiotic for every probiotic. And for years, like even, early on, people were coming in and, I was really on top of the probiotic science, but I was so focused on probiotics and not the essence of it. Like where did this come? Where was this at before probiotic supplements existed versus me trying to find the best probiotic supplement? The foundational piece is, in order to increase that diversity, because here's the very best data that we have, as your diversity of microbes goes down, your weight goes up. As your diversity of microbes go down, your insulin resistance goes up. Cognitive impairment goes up. I can keep going on. We've got data on all of these things now. And so we want to increase our diversity. How do we do that? We've got to increase the diversity of foods that we eat. It's very simple. We've got to provide the food, the appetizers for the friendly flora to feel welcome. And so even today, if we're haphazardly doing these elimination diets, we might be eliminating some healthy foods that we need to have a healthy microbiome. This is what I've seen with folks doing an elimination diet, getting well, losing weight, and then having problems 2 years later. And they're just like, why? And then they try to do the diet that got them there, and they're just like, I'm not doing it well enough. I gotta restrict more carbs. I gotta, cut. I gotta keto harder. I've gotta, whatever it is. I've gotta vegan harder, paleo harder, and not actually taking into account what you need right now. And so I want to share this little nugget of wisdom, which is whenever you eat a food, you're eating that food's microbiome. So if you're eating a berry, you're eating that berry's microbiome and taking it on. If you're eating an avocado, you're taking that avocado's microbiome on. So the diversity that we can bring in, especially during the seasons, because that's what the researchers found too, is that these hunter-gatherers were eating in accordance to the season. Here we live in LA, we can get whatever we want whenever we want, and that's not normal. And that's okay. It's not to say like you can't have your favorite food, but once we habitually are eating the same stuff over and over, even if we're healthy and we're eating, organic, we're eating, our metabolic typed whatever, we can easily fall into a rut of eating the same things over and over and over again. And so paying a little bit more of attention to what's in season, just adding in a little bit, you don't have to completely overhaul your diet. Just seek diversity, So that's what I want to, one step for everybody to take today is this week, add in, 3 different foods that you haven't eaten in a while. Maybe you've been doing a lot of greens, kale or whatever, and now just why don't you do some asparagus? Let's go hit some asparagus and get that weird pea, that a lot of people
That's
get.
the goal. with the microbiome piece, then I'm thinking about meat, and then I'm also thinking about like fruit and vegetables like you talked about. So the microbiome quality of the fruit and vegetables would be based on the soil. And then for the meat, the microbiome quality would be based on the soil and the food that they're eating. So when we're thinking about like quality of microbiome diversity of the things we're eating that eventually become us, that is where that matters.
Yeah. So the term really for this is that it's not you are what you eat, you are what you ate, right? So whether it's the plant kingdom or animal kingdom, everything's eating something, all right? Even our plants are eating something, and they're eating things that, they're taking on things from bacteria, from the soil, microbes, whatever the case might be. Recycled other plants are getting assimilated by these plants. Everything on earth eats something. And so what are the foods that we're eating actually exposed to? And this is one of the biggest issues today. I was actually just talking with this really great researcher at UCLA. He's been studying the microbiome for 40 years.
Wow.
So this has only become a hot topic in the last maybe 10 years. And so he was doing this when people thought he was a Looney Tune. Like, what are you talking about? The gut. And now he's got a new project looking at the gut and the immune system, obviously, with all this going on in the world. And it's just like, he's like, I've been known that. Like, so yeah, it's
respect.
really.
I think it's always like, I think I'm early on stuff. And then you hear about that, you're like, yo.
Yeah, it's so crazy, like for me, my greatest teacher is my mother-in-law. Like she is my, man, I just.
Say more.
So blown away by her. I mean, when I met her, when my wife first brought me over to their place, she was like, listen, because they're from Kenya. And she was like, listen, you're going to see some weird stuff in here. Don't listen to them. They're crazy. There's all this weird food in there. And so I go in, and there was like grass in the house. Like it was like a wheatgrass tray.
Cool.
But I was like, I've never seen grass inside, And, she was juicing and all this stuff. And this was like, 17 years ago. And she had been doing it for a long time. She also been teaching meditation for decades at that point too. And come to find out, and I didn't know this at the time, but I saw, and the thing is, because I didn't see it with my own eyes, still I hold this place of hesitancy to even share the story, because I'm very much like, unless I see the data and proof, I don't like to talk about it. But I trust my wife. If I don't, I mean, she's gonna murder me. So my mother-in-law used to walk with a cane, and I saw the canes, you know. So she had like a nice cane, like if she was going somewhere or whatever, and then she had like her everyday cane. The person that I know, like she was just doing sprints with us.
Wow.
You know, dancing and doing lunges at the track, like, and she's in that category of senior citizen, but she is so robustly healthy and so much vitality, and she was able to turn this around by changing her nutrition. And at the time, I was still in college. That's where I met my wife, and I really, this is such a humbling thing, but I think all of us do have to go through this point where we really think we know what we're talking about. And I really thought I knew what I was talking about then, because I was fit, you know, I was helping people, not everybody, but I was helping people, you know, to achieve some fitness. So I really thought I knew my stuff. But it was in that moment when even though I transformed my own health, and I had a so-called incurable spinal condition when I was 20, and it was a severe degeneration of my spine, my disc degenerative disease. And I reversed the condition, even though it was so-called incurable. But it took a couple of years before I realized that I could do anything about it. Long story short. So I was experiencing this state of health. I was helping people. I'd been kind of running my own entrepreneurial thing. I was working at the university gym as well. But every year I was still getting hay fever, and I had asthma and allergies that would pop back up. And so I had actually went to the ER, and I can't believe that I'm even saying this because it's so not a part of my reality, but I just couldn't breathe, you know, like it was a nightmare. And so I went to the ER, got my antibiotics. They didn't test me for any bacterial infection, by the way.
Wow.
And then, you know, I was going by their place, and my mother-in-law was like, so my daughter tells me that you are, you know, having these allergies. And I was like, yeah, you know, it's the weather. And she was like, is the problem out there, or is the problem in you? And that, like, straight up, that was a Neo Matrix moment. Yes. I was like, oh, what? Yo. And I realized that there was something off in my internal environment. I shouldn't be allergic to the world, you know, like I was in the world all this time. Why is this kind of devolved? And so I realized that I had some trigger foods that was creating this histamine reaction. I pulled those foods out. I even have them today every now and then.
What were they?
I don't like to say because I don't want people to know. I want to. I'm going to share.
Okay.
I'm going to share. But this is my case. Yes. Yep. Everybody's different. So for me, it was dairy. Primarily, dairy was the big one because I was doing like my organic granola, whatever. I had the best milk. It was like from, I don't know, there was like Amish people on the bottle. And, you know,
that's my country.
It was like it was pasteurized but not homogenized. Like I was trying to do the best I could. Yes.
Yeah.
But I had to have my milk. And now I know, like, it's really an addiction. There's casomorphines, right? So there are these compounds in milk that really create this excitement in the brain, right? So there's same thing with bread. You know, there's gluteomorphines, for example. These are things I didn't know about. Like, people come in like, I'll do whatever you say, just don't take my bread. Yeah, I literally didn't even tell them that we were going to do that. You know, they just had it in their mind, you know. So for me, and I can have some dairy now, like it's not that big of a deal, but but I know if I have a little bit too much, I start feeling a little. But now, you know, I haven't had any. I mean, it's so weird to even say this. Asthma, allergies, all this stuff is just not a part of my reality anymore. So, anyways, that humbling moment where I realized, like, that's why I feel that I'm in this position today, because every time when I go into the data, I'm thinking about what am I not seeing? How am I wrong? Literally asking, how am I wrong? Looking at the total opposite perspective as well, which is incredibly difficult to do today. But looking at the perspective of somebody who thinks the exact opposite, what would they see in this data? So I can come to a rational, logical, well-balanced conclusion. So thank you to my mother-in-law for that.
Wow.
Okay, we are approaching the holidays, and holiday time usually means crazy time. You know what I mean? And I really try to keep a bit of balance with the craziness in the schedule with workouts and meditation, yoga, cooking, journaling, just trying to keep my sanity. You know what I mean? I tend to neglect the fact that like my immune system, winter more than ever, just needs a bit of support. And so every single day I am using my propolis spray from Beekeepers Naturals, the Bee Immune Propolis Spray. It truly is tasty, but not only that, it is so powerful. So I keep it with me on the go. If I'm traveling at home, I spray about 5 sprays in my mouth, and this just like power part of the hive is helping to support the immune system, as well as soothe a scratchy throat, uncomfortable feelings in the throat. It is easy to use and super, super effective. I love Beekeepers Naturals. Y'all, you're going to go into your medicine cabinet and make some switches. These products are clean and effective. They actually work. They are third-party tested for all pesticides. They're super dedicated over there to sustainable beekeeping and helping save the bees, and they are female founded. We recently had the founder, Carly Stein, one of our dear friends, on the podcast, so check that one out. But I absolutely love their products. Again, the propolis throat spray is my go-to. The propolis is the defender of the hive. Bees use it to protect their hive from any bacteria that might harm them. It is the hive's immune system, so why wouldn't you use it to really support yours? You know what I mean? All right, go to beekeepersnaturals.com/almost30 or enter the code almost30 at checkout to get 25% off your first order. That's 25% major. Beekeepersnaturals.com/almost30 or enter the code almost30 at checkout to get 25% off your first order. This is your sign. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, I highly recommend it. Has completely changed my life. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. So if you are feeling like something is interfering with your happiness, if you need support, if you feel alone, if you feel like something is wrong with you and you're investing so much time in your health and all the things, but haven't yet started therapy, oh man, let's do it. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't need to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It is much more affordable than in-person therapy. I've recommended this to tons of friends, and they agree it is super affordable and easy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So we invest in everything else, right? But why not our minds? This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Almost 30 listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/almost30. That's BETTERHELP.com/almost30 for 10% off your first month. I was just talking to a friend this morning, and they were like, yo, I took the sleep drops from House of Wise, and I woke up in the same position. She's like, I didn't move. I slept soundly and deeply, and I was just so happy. House of Wise, if you haven't heard of them, is a company that we truly believe in, have invested in, and are so incredibly excited to share with you. They create full spectrum CBD products with natural active ingredients. They support your sex, sleep, stress, and now strength. I'm super, super proud to work with this company because they are supporting women just feel like themselves and feel like the best version of themselves. They are incredibly obsessed with high quality full spectrum hemp. They grow it in-house at manufacturer facilities in Colorado. So you don't have to worry about the quality there. And I wanted to share my favorite products right now from House of Wise. I'm obsessed with the sex gummies. So this is a gummy that I take about 30 minutes before I just want to get in the mood, get down, or even just hang out with me and me. You know what I mean? It just really helps me to relax. It actually has ingredients in addition to the CBD that help with blood flow, that help with sexual desire and energy. It helps with a sense of calm and support focus and concentration. So try the sex gummies. I'm also really obsessed with the strength gummy. So this is kind of like a very balanced pre-workout gummy that I take 30 minutes before a workout. It tastes delicious, kind of like pink lemonade. It has caffeine, a safe amount. It feels really, really good. So this will boost your energy. It has beetroot juice, which has been proven to help our red blood cells carry oxygen more efficiently. It has B vitamins, which play a role in cellular signaling, metabolism, and red blood cell production. And it has the CBD. So this is a really nice balance. So you won't experience that jittery feeling, but you will feel super, super energized. I'm excited for y'all to try House of Wise. Go to houseofwise.co and use the code almost30 at checkout to get $20 off. That's houseofwise.co. Use the code almost30 at checkout to get $20 off your first purchase. I know sometimes we shy away from practical gifts, but I think that's the way to go. With the holiday season coming up, I have a brand for you that most of the people on your list are going to need something from, and that is NutriBullet. They have blenders, they have food processors, juicers, and now they have a coffee maker, which I'm obsessed with. They also have baby food makers. Please head on over to NutriBullet. The prices are affordable and we have a discount. Stay tuned for that in a moment. But I'm obsessed with my new NutriBullet Brew Choice pod and carafe. This is a coffee maker where you can use pods or make a carafe of coffee, which I do, and it makes it in minutes. There's settings for different brew sizes. It's just the best. I make my super clean bulletproof coffee. I make my whole bulletproof concoction because I put it in the NutriBullet blender and blend it up. It's so good. So trust me, there is something here for everyone, and it's something that people are going to use every day for themselves to support a healthy lifestyle. Food processors, juicers, coffee makers, baby food makers, blenders, and more. So for our audience, I'm excited. You get a discount. You go to NutriBullet.com, use the code almost30nation. That's the code, almost30nation for 20% off site-wide. This is major. It's a huge discount on already affordable products. So get over there, stock up, get ahead for your holiday shopping. It's almost30nation is the code at NutriBullet.com, gets you 20% off site-wide.
The allergy thing is interesting because I feel like I've been having allergies lately, and I think it's trigger foods. I think it's nuts. So I think that was like a little message that I got there. But regarding looking at data and looking at information, that's something we really respect you for, is like the lens and approach you take to information. And I think it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to discern and disseminate information that they're receiving, because we're just like at a fire hose every single day of like self-help stuff, health related things, all this information that we can find online. And I think people get a little tired of having to feel like they have to determine things and eventually give up. But a lot of what you found in the past couple months and in the past year with everything that's changed with COVID has been incredibly profound to us and just so fascinating and interesting. What was like the beginning of that journey where everything started to go down with COVID and you were like, okay, I'm going to research this thing and understand this? Like, what's your process been like? Because I'm curious if you felt like you found information that's even surprised you along the way.
Sure. Thank you for asking this. This is so cool. So I was paying attention to the data from other countries before this ever showed up in America. You know, I was looking at the data in Italy specifically. And I saw really early on, I was watching these dubbed press conferences from their health minister and all kinds of just weird, nerdy stuff that I was doing.
Your wife's like, no.
I know.
Here
She's just like, again. What? She'll come home and see me watching this stuff. She's like, you're such a nerd.
Yeah, she's like, here he goes again.
Yeah. So the data showed that 88% of the folks that were having severe symptoms had at least one pre-existing chronic disease. And I was just like, their bodies, this virus appears to have a tropism towards lung tissue, but now we know it's more epithelial, more cardiovascular. But basically, it's a hyperinflammatory triggering condition. And I want folks to realize that the virus doesn't do it itself. It's your body's response to the virus. Your body creates the inflammation. A virus can't create inflammation. A virus it's not even alive necessarily. It's such a weird thing. We can get into that maybe, but you know what it does is your body, it begins to basically, the quote infection is the virus taking control of your cellular machinery and then printing out copies of itself, printing out copies of infected cells. It's really fascinating.
Matrix vibes.
Yeah.
Agent Smith
Yeah,
vibes.
Agent Smith. Yeah, Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
And so it's setting off this immune response where your system it knows like, hey, there's this abnormality taking place. Let's send in the guns, and that's where the inflammation comes from. And so we get into this place: is the inflammation controlled? Is it appropriate, or do we have this newly dubbed cytokine storm taking place, right? Or
because
is it
inflammation is good, is like a good sign.
Yeah, without
that-
inflammation, we die.
Right. Okay.
But
okay.
chronic is
but
bad.
chronic is bad.
Yes, if it's chronic, and even in the moment, it can be an acute inflammation that goes too far,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
But or it can under respond, right? So we want to look towards like what are some immunomodulators, and maybe we can circle back to that as well. So with that said, I know that obesity. If we're in a state of obesity, this is a pre-inflamed state. Like literally your fat cells, which we think, again, going back to what we were originally talking about, if we're targeting these fat cells, we want to burn fat. We want to kill the fat. That's not how it really works, because your fat cells, like when you're born, you have a certain amount of fat cells. They just get filled with contents, or the contents get emptied, right? And so as the contents of the cell, and a fat cell can literally have like 1,000 times its size, it can grow. It's crazy it's so intelligent and incredible. But as that fat cell begins to contain a lot of storage, there's an immune signal that takes place. And basically it's signaling to your body that you're infected. Like your fat cells are sending off this data as if you're infected. And so it's creating this pre-inflamed state. And then this inflammatory driven condition hits you. What do you think's gonna happen? You know, this is very basic stuff. So I saw the data and I was like, we're in trouble here. We are the sickest nation in the history of the world. Like, and so I just was just like, okay, this is our time. This is our moment. We've all been training for this, people.
Yeah.
This is our moment. We've got to focus on community wellness. We've got to get our citizens healthier. And so I focused on that, shared the early evidence, and I saw something interesting happen I've never seen before. And at that time, 19 years in this field, there was this extreme cognitive dissonance. There was this shift that took place where folks immediately allowed a certain narrative to integrate, and they start to see the world very differently, where this logical, applicable data, like we've got thousands of peer-reviewed studies on here's some things that we can do to actually have an appropriate immune response to fortify your natural killer cells, which the FDA even was working to fast track a drug targeting our NK cells because they're so effective at killing SARS-CoV-2 infected cells. All these things that we already have, but now it's just like, if you don't separate, you're gonna die. If you don't shut your business down, if you don't wear a mask, whatever the case might be, we started doing all these new things we've never done before. And I was just like, what? Okay, that's okay. We can have those things, but we've got to do these things we know work. We know these things work. Why are we not talking about these things? And so, you know, friends and colleagues, you know, people that I've supported, that I love, they were like, you know, they were like, you're absolutely right, Shawn, because I knew obesity was going to be the big issue. They're like, you're absolutely right, Shawn. Unfortunately, we can't get people healthier overnight, right? This was the story. And now here we are, almost 2 years later, and they're still not talking about this. And so what I did was, seeing that this cognitive dissonance was taking place, and by the way, so just to be clear, the CDC published a report. As of this recording, it was last month, and it was data from over 800 U.S. hospitals. No, as of this recording, it was 2 months ago. They took the data from over 800 U.S. hospitals, over 540,000 COVID-19 patients, and they found that the number one risk factor for death from COVID was obesity. I was fucking right. I don't want to be right. It's just obvious. The number one risk factor. The second leading risk factor, though, which is something I was like, okay, this cognitive dissonance is, why would this break happen in our psychology? It's because we're afraid. And we were just being inundated with irrational fear. Not, we can have safety, we can be logical, because we know this about, like, yelling fire you know, when something is on fire and creating a riot, basically. But it's happening psychologically for people. And so I was looking at what is the impact of rampant fear having on the immune system? Because I know this is what I've been studying. A big part of my work the last decade has been psychoneuroimmunology and psychoneuroendocrinology. And so knowing how fear can literally destroy your immune system. And so I sought out other voices as well, because I'm this cool science guy, you know, like I want to make sure I bring in a multitude of voices. And so I went to leading cell biologist, the term epigenetics that a lot of people have heard. He's the guy who impressed it upon our culture, Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's the guy. I got him, sat down with him, and I asked him to talk about the biology of fear. How does this actually influence our immune system? And man, he broke it down, you know. In short, we'll just say this immediate cortisol response is good. Like we actually get an immune boost if it's a short-term fear, right? In case you've got to heal like a cut or something, because your psychology is like prepared for some kind of external intrusion. That's what our fear response is for handling fight or flight, right? Today, we're not facing off against pandas in the wild. I don't know if anybody's ever faced a panda in the wild.
They'd be like, nice. That'd be great.
You know, wild bears or, you know, everybody uses saber-toothed tiger. I want to do something different. But we don't face off on those type of scenarios anymore. So we have a lot of creature comforts now. So we have time to manufacture fear.
Yes.
And your brain and biology does not know the difference. You could look at any prestigious neuroscientist. Your brain and biology does not know the difference between an imagined fear and a real occurrence, an imagined scenario and a real occurrence. And so if we're perpetually in fear, what happens with this again, cortisol is not bad. Inflammation is not bad. It's how it's produced and when it's produced, how often. So if we're constantly secreting these stress hormones, cortisol and the like, epinephrine, norepinephrine, if these things get imbalanced, the immune system, just the energy required to run those things to keep you in that fight or flight state, the energy required for your immune system becomes a lower tier, and it just starts to lose function rapidly. And so I was pointing this out because I absolutely knew with every fiber of my being, based on the data, that all of this fear we're being inundated with is going to lead to worse health outcomes. People are going to be sicker. More people are going to die. If you believe that this infection, if you get it, it is going to kill you, it has a much higher probability of killing you. We'll come back and I'll actually share why that is. We'll talk about the nocebo effect. So I knew this was the case. Now here's what the CDC's report found. The number one risk factor for death from COVID, and you got to put this in the show notes for everybody. Seeing is believing. It's on the CDC site, as if people actually are going and looking at it. The number one risk factor for death from COVID is obesity. The second leading risk factor for death from COVID is anxiety and fear-related disorders.
On the CDC website. Wow.
And I just can't make this stuff up. I knew that these were our two big issues. And then I think about the media who's been complicit in taking people's lives by inundating them with irrational fear, right? So there's no context to it.
For their benefit, too.
Exactly. And we have this, I don't know if you guys saw, I've posted it many times, but the CNN director, Charlie Chester, you didn't see this? Oh my God. Okay.
Wait, maybe a while ago I might have, but please share.
So, and this is no knock against any particular news network.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of any of them because of these tactics. They're all doing the same thing, which is not really news anymore. It's a slant. It's a certain narrative. And the crazy thing is all of these media companies are funded by the same people. It's nuts, but they know that this audience has this certain narrative. And so it's really just like Sports Center. Like they're using all of these different analogies. It's entertainment, you know, but Charlie Chester, the technical director at CNN, was caught on a hot mic. You know, this news organization did this rogue guerrilla thing, hidden camera, and he's one step under the director of the channel. And if you want, you guys, you could put the link to this as well. Again, seeing is believing. And what happened was, and this is the beautiful part, and I talked about this, you know, my friend and mentor Michael Beckwith shared with me, these things can happen today. If they happened 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, no one would ever know. Today, with technology and the interconnection of us, we can find out the lie the same day, or we can find out the truth the same day, like within maybe the same hour. And so the person asked him, and I know that I saw that they follow me, but the news outlet, I knew that they knew me because of the question that she asked. So she, number one, asked, why do you have this death toll ticker on your news channel all the time? And for me, I don't watch the news. I was at my neighbor's house and I saw it in the background and I thought it was like the stock ticker, right? And then I caught it and I was like, these are people. This is human lives that we have going as a death toll. That's not okay, right? And so, and he said, COVID is gangbusters for ratings. And he said, sometimes I see the number and I feel like we need to get it higher. Like, why isn't it higher? And then he said, I know that that's wrong. That's really messed up that I'm thinking that way. But it's just the way that this system has been built. And so she asked him, well, why don't you guys have a survival ticker and show people throw these numbers around, but I'm just giving a very blanket number, 99% folks being okay or surviving, whatever the case might be. Why aren't you showing that? And he thought about it for a second. He said, because that's not scary. And then he said the words that we hear. He said, if it bleeds, it leads. And she was just being all like, oh, that's cute. I like that, But she was just like egging him on to say more. And he says, as a matter of fact, we inundate the audience with so much fear, we actually reserve a segment at the end called the good stuff. And he said, it's sort of like the ice cream at the end of the pain, at the suffering, just to let you know that everything's going to be okay. Then we hit you with more fear again in the next hour. So this is what the medium is that we're existing in. And he also said that we only bring on people that take the bait or that are going to have our narrative. And if they don't, we just make fun of them.
My face.
I know.
If you're on YouTube and you're looking at my face.
Yeah.
How maniacal is that?
Yeah.
That's maniacal. My thing too is I thought and I'm maybe in my own world, but it's I think if you come to someone and you're like, hey, we're on the same page that the media is funded by your attention and your fear. I think most people would be like, yeah, I agree with that. And then you're like, hey, the government lobbyists are in bed with Big Pharma. And Big Pharma is one of the most corrupt spaces in the world. And they'd be like, yeah, totally. Hey, and then it's when we're trying to put things together or we're like, hey, our healthcare system, our food care system is fucked. The way that it's structured right now in the United States isn't supporting people in being well. The school system for med students isn't supporting them in being their best selves. The pharmaceutical is in bed. It's we're all yes, totally. I think we're all on that page. But then when you put it together, it's too much for people. Yeah. Or it's when you're kind of making the connection that they're all sort of participating in this thing. And I'm not saying it's a conspiracy or a coup, but what I'm saying is that it's all sort of touching each other to provide and create this environment that we're currently in where we are inundated with fear. We are inundated with this information that is skewed in a way to keep us complicit, to keep us just continuing this sort of trajectory that's leading us further from health. Yeah. And so your process with this, I think that's a really powerful example that you shared. Before COVID happened, before this sort of research you were doing, were you you probably being in the health space were okay, I'm aware that these systems are corrupt, but has it been hard for you to even take to understand how corrupt it really is?
I mean, I've seen things in a new light recently. Of course, I've been aware of these systems, but I just believe that, and this is still a rational perspective, even though it might not sound all that bright, but I really do believe that people are good.
Yes, 100%.
I believe that most people are really, really good, and they're trying to do the right thing. And so when we talk about even this Charlie Chester, he knows, even as he's saying it, you could see that there's some remorse there in what he's saying. And what he's doing, what he's thinking is, we're still trying to drive a healthier conversation, which is the person that we're backing is going to be better for the country or whatever the case might be. It's still some kind of altruism, but it can be twisted. And we talked about this before we got started, where we see a situation where somebody compromises one time and it opens the door, right? A political figure. And so, for example, if we're talking about the influence of pharmaceutical companies, in 2020, 2/3 of Congress received a check from pharmaceutical companies. Like, it's not a joke. They're funded by them. Once you take that money, you have to do a faith. Something's going to happen. But they're just like, I'm trying to win this so that I can help change and make change in my community, right? But not understanding what is this built on. And so just to share what this is built on, because our solution, I started off by sharing some of the statistics on how sick we are. Why are we not getting better? You know, we're also the most drug taking culture in the world, in the history of humanity. We've got all the drugs. About 70% of our citizens are taking pharmaceutical drugs, but something is not working. Why is that? Well, this is kind of messed up, but the EJS Center for Ethics at Harvard University did a meta-analysis looking at all these different databases, because you can't just go to the CDC site or the FDA and find this data. But they affirm that 200,000 Americans die every year from pharmaceutical drugs, right? Every year, 200,000. And that's the low end of the spectrum. And they also noted in their study, this is Harvard. These are the smart guys. Yes. They're not trying to just be out here making trouble for nothing. And this is just another affirmation. There's many other data points that have come to this conclusion, but they noted that the FDA does not acknowledge this and only accounts for a small percentage of these deaths. And so what's happening here is that we have a system of medicine and health that is so centered on pharmacology and the treatment of symptoms of disease. And so, for example, there was a time span when people were coming into my office and probably 70% of people, maybe even 80%, probably 70% of people were on a statin. Like, it was just, everybody was on one.
What's that again?
A statin is a cholesterol reducing medication. And so I was just like, I was seeing this wave happen where it went from maybe 2 out of 10 to it just happened so quickly. And it's because it would seem to be some very inert thing. Like, it's just going to help to keep your cholesterol in check. The question is, what does cholesterol do in your body? And what happens when we target this thing superficially, right? So now I'm just going to give the snapshot. I had this data back then. Now it's easily accessible, but you can just go to Dr. Google and look it up. But folks on a statin have a 30% increased incidence of developing diabetes, right? So we're having this issue over here, and we're signaling or starting the fire for another issue, and we're not addressing the root cause, right? And the question is, for example, a lot of folks coming in they had heart disease, high blood pressure, hypertension. Lisinopril is another drug that was often prescribed. And so what it's doing is superficially lowering the blood pressure. But the question is, what is elevating their blood pressure to this dangerous place in the first place? Which could be their diet, which the Journal of the American Medical Association said poor diet is the #1 cause of heart disease. Could be their diet and their bodies revolting. I shared that study about processed foods creating this metabolic mess. And so that could be the issue. It could be sleep deprivation is one of the fastest ways to increase your insulin resistance, increase your blood pressure. It could be stress. Obviously, we know we could just be stressed out and our blood pressure, we can go into hypertension, right? And a myriad of other factors that it could be. Lack of movement. Your body's just working harder trying to move blood through your body because you're sedentary. We're the most sedentary culture in the history of the world, right? So these are all the things your body is telling you, and it's giving this symptom of high blood pressure, hypertension. It's giving you this symptom like, hey, the way that you're living, what you're doing right now, your inputs, your exposures, I don't like this. To get me back to homeostasis, you have to change. Instead, here's a drug for that. We'll just mask the symptom where your body's it's like sending off an alarm inside of you. And what happens is we essentially mute the alarm, but the alarm is still going off. And so what the body does is it pops up another alarm over here, right? In the form of a, quote, side effect. But it's not a side effect. It's a direct effect of ignoring the first thing. So this is what our system of healthcare is built on, unfortunately. And pharmaceutical drugs definitely have their place, and they can be life-saving for sure. And also, especially in acute instances, But for the things that actually kill most of us, these chronic diseases, lifestyle-related chronic diseases, it is an absolute number one. It's killing hundreds of thousands of Americans every year themselves, the drugs directly. But secondly, we're not actually helping people because we're giving them these drugs. And how many more millions are dying from heart disease and diabetes and liver disease and whatever the case might be because you're just giving them a fucking drug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought through the point of like the altruistic side, because it's just really important. Like the people in government or the people in the medical industry and the pharmaceutical, like their intention is usually good. Like their intention is to prescribe something that they believe will help people and does help people in a lot of cases. And a lot of times within government, within the news, they're like, we'll take this funding because what we believe we could do would be helpful for people. And I think that's just really important, because I think that's where people get a little turned off, where they're like, oh, where they kind of get worried that they think everyone's out to get them or going against them. Mm-hmm. So it's that reminder that like every person has that aspect of them that could potentially have a shaky value foundation that could be swayed by money out of fear or lack or all these things. And I think I'm really glad that you brought that through, because I want to make sure that that's like solidified for people.
Yeah. So I mean, there's so many good people that are in, Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Merck.
Yeah.
They're getting into it. Just today, actually, I just released an interview that I did with a doctor of pharmacy who, again, from the inside, and she also worked alongside the CDC in her pharmacological role. Because of what she saw early on in her education, she knows that, okay, we've got all these different drugs for these different symptoms, but a red flag went off for her when she saw she was like, she reiterated, every day I got an email on another drug being recalled every day of her career. And so one day she was just like, how are they getting approved if they keep getting recalled for safety issues? Why isn't anybody talking about this? And so, one of the things that she shared was, of course, like she started to see some of the alarming data with folks. And again, she got into it to help people, but she just was able to see like, this is really about, she would go to these conferences and like, there's a circle and the patient is in the middle. It's patient centric. It's all about the patient. And then these other things are the bubbles outside. But really she was just like, the pharmaceutical industry is in the center because they're making so much money. And what they're teaching physicians to do is sharing some of this data on these drugs for fill in the blank issues, incentivizing them, and getting them to work on compliance for themselves and for their patients versus real healthcare, real education. And so
when you say compliance, what do you mean?
To say yes, to prescribing the drug and to say yes to taking the drug, right? And so being able to, we have these red flags that go off, but to be able to silence those things before they even come up, right? How can we get to the patient faster to get this drug in their hand for their own good? And so, so she shared that, but also this points to something that a lot of folks don't know about. Again, she worked with the CDC. She had that direct interaction, but then we have the FDA as well, the Food and Drug Administration, which this is such a contentious thing today as well. But the truth is our FDA, who's responsible for determining, because again, if we've got all these drug recalls happening, how the fuck are they getting approved in the first place? It's very simple. A couple decades ago, a shift took place, and it was under the guise of public good to be able to get needed drugs to the public faster. And the FDA was like, hey, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough resources, so they opened up something called user fees, where pharmaceutical companies were now able to pay the FDA for faster approvals and faster reviews of their drugs. Today, it's grown into a multi-billion-dollar income for the FDA from pharmaceutical companies. I'm saying billions. They receive billions with the B in funding from drug companies. Our FDA is funded. 75% of their scientific review board is from pharmaceutical companies. And guess what's happened? The rates of approval have skyrocketed. And also some of the most dangerous drugs in our history have come out since, like the opioid epidemic, which Johnson & Johnson was just ordered to pay part of a $26 billion lawsuit because of their contribution to this opioid epidemic. which has killed about 1 million Americans since 2000. You know, it's crazy again, like, but nobody's talking about that right now.
Yep.
It's so crazy.
That's what I think is weird too, is like a few years ago before COVID happened, you'd talk about the opioid epidemic and you'd be like, it's the pharmaceuticals, you know, the data's there, the information is there about how corrupt the pharmaceutical industry is, you know, and we can see as a case study with the opioid epidemic, but now it's like we kind of forgot about that in this, and we're like, okay, now we trust sort of what's going on.
And I'm curious about like the moral play. Because like I think that's kind of the shift or the difference for me between how people would react years ago to those facts about the opioid epidemic, and to now with COVID, there is in the media like this moral play of you are a good person, a good citizen if you comply with this or do this, even though there are kind of these like just a little bit of alarm bells going off, like, that was quick, or like maybe this isn't right for my body right now, or, you know, I have antibodies, or I trust natural immunity, or whatever it is. It's like there is a moral play that just kind of blinds people and skews the way that they are perhaps questioning these bigger companies. Can you kind of expand upon that in your experience, you know, kind of going through the data and then also talking to real people in your audience about, you know, kind of their compass? Because I think a lot of people feel a responsibility to do one thing over the other. Yeah.
Again, I believe most people are good. And we also believe that we are sovereign. Even when we are being manipulated, that's when you don't know it's manipulation, you know? And it's much easier to manipulate someone when you're afraid.
Yes.
When you're not in a balanced headspace, you're going to be more reactive. And once you invest in a certain way of thinking, it becomes harder and harder and harder to step away from that form of thinking. And this is what we see in our healthcare system, because again, this is our best and brightest. And again, I had certain events take place that broke that from me, that response to think that I've got it all figured out. The crazy thing is, when you look at how you're wrong proactively, you end up being right a lot more, you know? And so, but people they're so wholeheartedly believing in their narrative, but it's coming from the same people that we all agreed upon are industries that are corrupt, that thrive on manipulation and fear. So many people just like, you know, I don't trust the news. They're getting their information from the news. Like, that's where they're getting their information from. And they're at the same time, they'll literally be like, I don't trust the news. And the trust of the news based on the data is lower than it's ever been. But people are watching it more than ever. What? There's something broken here. There's something that's not working accurately. And it's because the fear will drive you to check it out. The fear is going to keep you like, I need to be informed. But you're not informed, you're inundated. You're being manipulated. You can't help it because of the state that you're in. So we were already pre-conditioned to be so compliant and not to question things. With our education system, for example, we have an education system that, unfortunately, this is tough to talk about because I've had the opportunity to work with so many kids over the years. But we have an education system that is based on very rudimentary things. Like, it's not really based on applicable things for our reality. It's not based on you as a human being. It's based on a certain system and being good at this system. And if you're not good at this system, you're a bad student. If you don't want to sit down and listen and do everything that you're told, you're not compliant. We got drugs for that. And so we are also the nation that gives more pharmaceutical drugs to our children than any nation in history by far. That's a problem. Psychoactive drugs for children, and then we see higher rates for these kids once they cycle out of fill in the blank with illicit drugs, with suicide, with depression, whatever the case might be. These things that we're experiencing right now are not an accident, all right? And again, that's another one of those figures that is just dramatically increased in the last couple of decades, is suicide for children and adolescents. something is off, you know? So our education system is teaching some brilliant, beautiful children that they're not good enough unless you comply, right? So, you know, and again, this isn't about being disrespectful and like, you know, but it's just about the nature of a child to explore, to move, to be creative. These things are silenced very early on. Like kindergarten, you can use the big crayons and shit and make some, you know, but eventually they're like, you can't make the duck purple. You know what I mean? Like it all becomes like, if you don't do it this way.
Color in the lines.
Yeah, you know, and so because again, like we can express ourselves here and then suddenly here, this is the right answer or wrong answer.
Yeah.
Do you understand? Like this is the way that we are trained from an early age. So again, we're conditioned for years to be compliant. We're conditioned for years with our state of health. We're not mentally well. So a great example of this is, I'll share two. So one of them was done by researchers at the Ohio State University. They wanted to find out how abnormal blood sugar can affect compassion between a couple. All right. So, and this has a lot to do with our psychology as well. Like if you're irritated with somebody, that's a psychological experience. And it's also physiological, like your body, your biology feels it too. And so they had glucose measurements, continuous glucose measurements to see what would happen when somebody's blood sugar is abnormal. And so what they found, bottom line with the data, they consistently found that when folks' blood sugar was lower, they were more aggressive towards their partner and less likely to resolve conflicts.
That's
the
easy.
other thing.
I'm like, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Like, but we know this stuff, but we really don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, and so having that bit of data, like what type of person is showing up in that conversation? You know, are you physiologically okay to even have a conversation? Now, the other one is, this was done with a population of prison inmates. And they want to find out how nutrition can affect their behavior, specifically aggression and violence. And so what they did was they gave one of the groups just basic stuff. This isn't even the good stuff, but just increased micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, which are critical for cognitive function. And then they gave another group of inmates a placebo. 4 months later, they look at the data, they look at the behavior, they look at their experience. The folks who had the increase in their nutrition intake had about a 40% reduction in behavioral offenses and a 30% reduction in violent offenses just by changing their nutrition.
Wow.
Like, and the thing was, this is, if you don't have a context for how remarkable this is, researchers didn't believe it. A bunch of researchers were rejecting the data because they're just like, all the therapies that we have, all the interventions, nothing has gotten close to a 30% reduction in violence. Like this can't be. So they repeated it. So the first one was done by researchers at Oxford. The second one was published in the journal Aggressive Behavior, which there's journals for everything. And so they repeated it and got essentially the same results with another group of inmates. Just by giving them better nutrition, they became essentially better people. Now, let me be clear. They also tested personality. Like nothing changed. They couldn't figure out what it was. Like, what is this food doing that's making this happen? And unless they are able to look at it through this lens, which I'm looking at it through the lens of a neuroscientist for this particular thing, what's happening in the brain when they're deficient in magnesium, when they're deficient in essential fatty acids? The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for social control, for distinguishing between right and wrong, for forethought, for decision making, that part of the brain starts to really lose function. And more primitive parts of the brain take over because the brain is stressed. So your amygdala is, we call it an amygdala hijack. And this part of the brain is very emotional. It's more concerned about survival of self. And basically the adult leaves the room, the rationality is gone. You know, or dramatically can decline. So this is what we're seeing today, where we have very, very smart people who are using their intelligence to rationalize illogical things. Because they're driven by, it's an emotional response first. And then once you step into it, you got to keep going. It's very difficult to admit when you're wrong, especially if you haven't exercised that muscle. So
that's what I was thinking about. I was like talking to a friend who's like a leader in the space, and I was like, how can we support people in the next couple of years with being okay with being wrong? And this is supporting myself and being wrong too. Like, I'm wrong all the time, but it's like, I think that's a thing that's missing is like, I think people dig their heels in because it's so scary to be wrong. Because if you're wrong about something, it's like, what else are you wrong about? And I think that's what happened in like a little bit of my awakening, where you're like, okay, I'm wrong about this. I was wrong about this. I was wrong about this. You know, you just kind of go down the gamut of everything you're wrong about. And it can be scary for people to feel like they're wrong about something that they've felt so passionately and fervorous about.
It's like losing your identity when you feel like you're wrong.
Yes.
Or you realize you're wrong.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's scary. You know, you're like, yeah, I just laugh. I laugh at some of the things I used to think and some of the ways I used to express and be. But it is kind of weird. You're like, oh, what? I was so sure. It kind of makes you lose trust in yourself. You're like, I was so sure.
Yeah.
How was I so sure? And now I'm not. It's a little scary and disorienting.
Yeah.
What would be, or I guess the last thing I want to say about this too is like, I just want to kind of reiterate too, coming from the point of like caring about people and like loving people and being people that want the best for people and people that want healthy people that are happy, that are able to have solutions that are actually more simple than we think. And I guess the last thing I want to drive home from and hear from you is about like just coming back home to the point of like, we share all this information because we care about providing different perspectives and opinions, not because we're wanting to shame or blame people or make them feel bad or gotcha anyone or anything like that. So can you just talk a little bit about like the overall energy that you want to bring through when you're kind of sharing these studies and information, and how it's really deeply rooted in like an intense care for the direction that we're going as a society?
Yeah. So this is, you guys are so awesome. This is, it has to be, there's a lot of superficial compassion taking place. You know, there's a lot of overnight health experts, you know, like this is healthy, do this thing and, you know, I'm healthy or I'm making other people healthy. And so what's happening is there's a lot of, even with the research and understanding things, there's a lot of skimming. There's a lot of like window shopping. People aren't really utilizing our greatest capacity, something that our souls are driven towards, which is discovery and learning. And we're putting that discovery and learning into the Real Housewives. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Or, you know, into Squid Game, into, you know, whatever the case might be. We're in the golden age of television. I think all this stuff is great. However, we're outsourcing our exploration. We're outsourcing our adventure. We're outsourcing our curiosity. And if you just take a little bit of that back and invest it in any of these subjects, just having that childlike nature and wanting to discover and go and not just look at the headlines or to skim or to window shop, but really dig in, get uncomfortable, and really look into something and have the audacity to look at it from multiple perspectives. You have that capacity to do it. And so this is real compassion, is when you can actually understand that other person who has the seemingly total opposite belief, but they just want to be happy. They want to be healthy. They want to protect their family, and understand that they're operating from that place. They're not stupid. They're not, you know, ignorant. They don't want to hurt people. When we start allowing these narratives to be put out there, that's when it really gets even more divisive, you know? So whatever you believe right now, we've got to understand at the core, most people are trying to help people. Most people are trying to be healthy and do the right thing. Their perception of how to get there might not be accurate based on logic. And this is where I kind of come in as just like, let's just be on, let's take a look at this. See, is this going good? Like, let's actually just take an honest, open perspective and look at the state of affairs. Is any of this shit working? And I think that pretty much every, even remotely logical human being could be like, yeah, something's not right here. Like something is off. And I would also implore people to listen to your heart. Really, your intuition Oh my goodness. I mean, my wife she's right all the time. You know, even when she's wrong, she's still right. Like, it's still like very close. You know, whenever I listen to her, like, I mean, she just knows, man, you know, but she's also tuned into that. And, you know, so it's the greatest gift that you have, especially a woman's intuition, like really listening to your gut. But it's more difficult when you're inundated with this stuff out here, when you're inundated and so invested in the lives of other people through the screen, or when you're so invested and inundated, your gut, if your gut isn't healthy, that's another very visceral thing, right? So we know like most of our serotonin is in our gut. So like this feel good neurotransmitter helping to keep us feeling more balanced in a quote good mood. What if we got some, you know, some stuff that doesn't jive with our system in there? It's going to kind of suppress that access. You know, we know this gut-brain connection is a real thing. You know, the vagus nerve, that data going back and forth, that's just one of these super highways connecting it. So seeking to take back control of your thinking right now and leading with compassion when other people are saying it or proposing what their compassion is. Let's utilize true compassion, which is, let me actually look at things from the other person's perspective. This does not mean that you're not going to get upset. This does not mean that you're not going to be angry. You're not going to be sad. You're not going to be afraid. These are all valid and healthy human emotions. We just don't want any of these emotions to take control of our lives because it's going to pull us out of balance. You know, so utilizing our emotions, listening to them, asking what is this fear trying to tell me? You know, what is this hurt from my family member who doesn't want to see me because I don't agree with them? What is this trying to teach me? Right? So, but to be able to answer these questions, to sit and to allow yourself that access, we've got to unplug from the other stuff, you know? And so I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah, very. I love this. It's about raising kids, but they say that active toys, they're talking about toys. They're like active toys make a passive mind and passive toys make an active mind. So it's like giving a kid a box. That creates an active mind because then they're playing in the box. But if you give them like Fortnite, they're going to become passive because they're watching all that and it's already doing all the imagination for them. So it's even applicable to us as adults and as humans. It's like when we're just inundated with these like very active TV shows, video games, music, podcasts, you know, all this kind of stuff, it creates this like passive environment for us to exist rather than using like our imagination or our compassion muscle. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful.
And no wonder, you know, I feel like I feel like my prayer for myself and others too is like that we become so in tune with the nuance of what's affecting us. So it's like noticing that on a day when I'm on my phone a lot, maybe the TV's on a lot, maybe we're on Zoom calls a ton, that I'm feeling different and why, and just really being so present to the feeling in our bodies, in our hearts, and that we can kind of get curious about what could possibly feel better. And I just wanted to touch on too, like this need or this want to be accepted. And I think that's so much of what drives defensiveness these days, where if someone were to like just question something, and we've seen it, you know, I'm not saying anything new, that you might be ostracized from the group, from the family, from the community, from fill in the blank. And it's so scary. So I just have a lot of compassion for people who feel unsafe in that way. Last question. What have you learned or even just fortified for yourself as a human being, and even more so as like a father, because I think a lot about parents in these times, with everything that we've all gone through collectively, but then also from your unique perspective and access to, or hunger for the data and really getting curious about that. What has either changed or been just cemented as a father raising kids?
Wow. You know, I just recently looked at what it is. Until now, I never really realized how strong I am. You know, I never really looked at it. I'm just being myself, and I've never had so much introspection on the things that I've overcome. You know, I've just been busy doing the things, you know, and so certain people, you know, every day I get these messages, you know, thank you for, you know, sharing, speaking up, you're so courageous. And I'm just like, huh? Like, this is not hard. This is not, I've been through way more difficult things than this. And so for me, I really, for the first time in my life, I understand how strong I am. Like, I am very, very capable. And because of that, like, I welcome more. I want to give me whatever obstacle, because I'll find a way. I always do. And everybody listening, the same thing. Everything you've been through, you've made it. And so we tend to, because of our society, it pulls us away from our inner knowing. And sometimes it can be hidden away. But right now, you know, for me, and especially, you know, with my kids, like, this is a big reason why, to be honest, why I'm doing this work at such a passionate level, is because I'm really thinking about the children, not just my kids, but because I come from an environment where, you know, when I was 4 years old, I was a baby, you know, I was a little kid. And, you know, the kid next door, he was a little bit older, and, you know, we lived in not the best conditions. Like, we lived in a pretty, you could die, you know what I mean? And we kept getting into these little scuffles like boys do, but my mother and his mother and another family member, they thought it would be a good idea to make us fight each other. You know, I was just a baby. I was 4 years old. And I distinctly remember, like, why is my mom making me do this? I don't want to do this. And within half a second, he pushed me into the corner of a wall, and, like, I have this big scar on the back of my head to this day. And from that moment, I was taught, like, you solve your problems through violence. And I wanted to make my mother proud. And so I got him back, and I got many more back, to the degree I was kicked out of high school for an entire year. I graduated in 3 years of high school, not because I'm exceptionally smart, which it was pretty easy, to be honest. But at the time when I got kicked out, I was on student advisory. I was in this new program. I was a teenage health consultant, is what it was called. I was in the first college credit program. It's called Inroads with St. Louis University. The list goes on and on. Scholar, athlete, all the things. I got into a fight. It didn't matter. They kicked me out for a year, which was unheard of. I was in this so-called DSEG program, bused from the inner city to the, quote, good schools. And they just made an example out of me. Like, it didn't matter how good you are. And so, same thing, you would think I'd get my act together once I got to college. I got kicked out of college for fighting, you know, and I wouldn't, like, I don't want to hurt anybody, you know. So I grew up in these conditions, and I know what it's like for these children. Like, it is a minor miracle that I'm here with you guys today. You know, I'm from Ferguson. Most of my years on this planet, I lived in Ferguson and Florissant, Missouri, which has become kind of infamous. And so I'm driving into the university, like, trying to get around, you know, getting pulled over and, like, all these things. Like, I had all these continuous obstacles. People, you know, loved ones getting murdered, and, you know, like, my stepfather is in an adult living facility right now because of crack. Like, he can't even take care of himself. These are all the things, and I just barely sidestepped each and every one of them. And the reason why is because I'm strong as fuck, and I knew that I'm going to be better than this environment. My stepfather was strong as fuck. He just didn't know because of the conditions around him told him other than. He's such a beautiful soul, like, he's such a good person, but none of that matters unless you know who you are. You know, so right now, with everything that's taking place, who isn't being thought about are our children. There's a superficial concern about our children, but the tens of millions of kids who are now a year behind in their education, millions of children are never going to catch up. Their one shot, my shot was through education to get out of those circumstances where my godbrother, he didn't make it. He was murdered. He died. Was through education. And so their instance now, we're going to have millions of children who are now psychologically underdeveloped, socially underdeveloped, not adhering to this conventional education about what success looks like and you being a good student. And their rate of incarceration is going up, their rate of drug use, suicide, murder, the list goes on and on. And this is, again, just like I said with the obesity and the fear, I knew, like I'm telling you guys right now, the data will come out that what we've done is we've tried to protect the few and sacrificed millions of children in the making of it. And so this is what I'm standing for. This is what I'm doing this for, because the thing is, I believe in miracles. I know that we can turn this thing around, but it's going to take a lot of us to step up and to do something about it. Not superficially, but truly get our kids healthy, get our communities healthy. Start treating people as people and not as numbers on a screen, or treating our children as special, unique gifts, you know, that have, again, not everybody listening, nobody has ever existed like us, ever in the history of humanity, and nobody ever will. Like, this is their one unique expression of life itself, expressing through them. You know, it's such a beautiful thing. And for us to start to honor that, let's create systems of education that honor that, you know, that teach health. How do you tap into that? How do you care for yourself so you feel good, so that you have more compassion towards other people? Because we know all these things are affected by our conditions. And so the last thing, and thank you for asking this question and for allowing me to speak on this. You know, I didn't know if I was going to be able to talk about it, man. It's very complex, but, you know, I believe that this is tough. Like I said, every single person, everything that you've been through, you're here, and you are strong and capable. You're creative, infinitely creative. And the more that we can tap into that, into our resourcefulness, because a lot of the things that we're struggling with right now is a lack of resources, or feeling like we don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have this support, we don't have this access, we don't have this. Man, we can get stuff done. If we have to, we can get it done. Or we can outsource our thinking to the screen. You know what I mean? And that's cool. Again, let me be clear. A little bit of screen is all good. Like, it's the golden age of television, like I said. And, you know, we got social media and all these things, but we cannot allow this. That's not thinking. My mother-in-law calls it borrowed desires. That's really what we're operating from. What does your spirit really want? What does your spirit really know? Being able to access that, you know, that's what this is, giving us an opportunity to do that like never before. It might seem super crazy, but a lot of the best times in our species' history have come from a lot of chaos. But also, we're writing the history books right now. What cultural structure are we going to have when we move out of this? Is it one that is ushering us into being we're already the most unhealthy nation in the history of humanity, but are we going to, you know, 10x that, set the bar incredibly high? Or are we going to have this renaissance in health and connectivity and love and self-respect and all these beautiful things, you know? So again, thank you for asking the question, allowing me to speak on it. I don't get to talk about it that often. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Shawn Stevenson, thank you so much for coming. This has been so incredible. Can you tell our audience just a little bit where to find you?
Sure. So where you're listening to this awesome podcast, you can find my show as well. It's called The Model Health Show. And yeah, it's just, we do master classes on every subject matter that you can imagine with health and wellness and relationships and all the good stuff. And also, you know, it's so crazy that I'm saying this again, like coming from where I come from, these are the moments. And if I could throw one other thing out there for everybody, I would implore you to start to practice gratitude. I know you people hear this, but even for the small things, you know, just a day-to-day, starting a gratitude practice. I think that I'm never jaded by this stuff. Like, this is a total adventure for me, all this stuff every day. I'm realizing how strong I am because I'm so wrapped up, to be honest, in the adventure and the beauty of it all, but I can have both. And so coming from where I come from, there was a teacher, my 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Blackmore, she took an interest in my writing. And it's that moment. That was the spark of, now I have this international best-selling book, Sleep Smarter. And my latest book, Eat Smarter, is a USA Today national bestseller. It was the #1 new release of all books in the United States when it came out.
Wow.
And just as of this recording, last week, Mel Robbins sent me a text because I had no idea. And the audiobook for Eat Smarter was in the top 10 most downloaded in the country on Audible. Wow. And this was up with the perennial bestsellers, you know, Matthew McConaughey, Atomic Habits, David Goggins, all these guys that are always there. And there's this book about food and nutrition from this guy from St. Louis. So just very grateful for that. So people can pick up Eat Smarter and Sleep Smarter everywhere books are sold. And yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. We love you. We'll see you later.
Soon. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into Almost 30 Podcast. That was Shawn Stevenson of the Model Health Show. And we would love if you subscribed to Almost 30. We do health, wellness, spirituality. We try and keep it really approachable and fun. And if you're new, welcome to the community.
Welcome. You can also find us on Instagram. It's at Almost 30 Podcast. We share funny things, inspiring things, share a little bit of BTS about our lives, and always love, love, love connecting with you. So make sure you follow us there. And I am at Lindsay Simsick on Instagram.
And I am at ITS Krista. It's Krista. And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.